Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says Tehran's standoff with Washington is unsolvable and vowed it will never bow to U.S. pressure. His comments follow a suspension of nuclear talks after U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear sites during June's 12-day war. While Iran and European powers agreed to resume discussions, France, Britain, and Germany warned they could trigger UN sanctions if Tehran refuses. Western nations accuse Iran of seeking nuclear weapons, a claim Tehran denies, insisting its program is for peaceful energy.
This issue, negotiation with America, is unsolvable. He, the President of the U.S., wants Iran to obey America's orders. The Iranian nation is deeply offended by such a great insult and will stand up, with all its strength, to those who hold such misguided expectations. Those who say don't chant slogans against America, they can get angry and become hostile towards you. These people are superficial. Those analysts who ask, why aren't you directly negotiating with America and why aren't you solving your problems? In my opinion, are superficial. That is not the essence of the issue. They were so convinced that this attack would shake the foundation of the Islamic Republic in the country. They were so convinced that it would turn the people against the Islamic Republic. They were so sure that one day after the attack began, they sat down to discuss who would govern Iran after the Islamic Republic and how. They even appointed a king. Today, our enemy, this enemy standing in front of us, the Zionist regime, the most hated regime in the world. The paths the Zionist regime is getting help through must be blocked. The paths where they get help must be blocked. What the brave people of Yemen are doing today is the right thing to do.
This is Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 9, and it reads, Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. All they shall speak and say unto thee, Art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? All right, I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rokah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yashar Allah, and a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwat, who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. All right, I want to go into a lesson based on the clip you just saw of the supreme leader of Iran and his response to Trump. All right, and all of this goes back into prophecy. All right, whether you know it or not, for those who are new, all right, World War III is prophesied to take place according to scriptures, according to prophecy. All right, this is Revelation chapter 11 and verse 14. And it reads, The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. All right, and that third woe is going into World War III. All right, so we are in the time of prophecy. All right, what you're starting to see is the nations rise up, all right, and basically go against the grain. At one point, there was a time where nations wouldn't rise up against America. Indeed, and definitely not indeed, but not in word either. What I mean by that is they wouldn't speak against this system. Most of the nations wouldn't even think to come against America. They would just try to find a way to make a deal. All right, which shows you that the nations, it's gotten so bad on the planet that nations have no choice but to fight. All right, this is Isaiah chapter 14. And I want to jump down to so it's Isaiah 14 and let me hit this point first. This is Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 6. I start at 5. It says, "The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepters of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke. He that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth." All right, and that's exactly what Edom, the so-called white man, has done. All right, it's just in this modern age, he's done that through economic pressure. So the sanctions, the tariffs are basically warfare. It's a form of violence. All right, and the scriptures talk about him ruling the nations with anger because it's really unnecessary. It's just him establishing his dominance over nations unnecessarily, unprovoked. All right, and this is why the nations have gotten to a point where they're basically forced to fight. All right, let me jump down. This is Isaiah 14 and 16. "They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms?" And how did they shake kingdoms? All right, with those atomic bombs. All right, over Nagasaki and Hiroshima, as well as the bombing of the NATO bombing. I believe that was in Yugoslavia. So they established their power and the earth was afraid. All right, the other nations were afraid before them. The other nations didn't think to go against the Western powers. All right, and when I say the Western powers, I'm talking about Edom, the so-called white man, and the American alliance, if you will. All right, whether that be America, Great Britain, Germany, France, the NATO, EU nations. All right, the scriptures talk about Babylon the Great, mystery Babylon. And for those that don't know, that's talking about America. All right, and the Lord is setting up the pieces for war against America. And eventually it's going to end with even America's allies turning on her. Now, what we see concerning India and their rhetoric is something that all the other nations know. They all know that they're being robbed. They all know that they're being ruled in anger. They all know that they're in a form of oppression. Yet, very few nations were willing to speak up. And this is a sign that in the eyes of these other nations, all right, the so-called white man is being viewed as weak. All right. That on top of the necessity to fight. All right. They're watching what Esau's done with Venezuela. All right. They remember what happened to Gaddafi, and they know that if they allow Esau to push them around, eventually they're going to lose everything. All right. The scriptures talk about him oppressing a man and his heritage, coveting fields and taking them by violence. Just because it's highly organized violence and wickedness, it doesn't make it right. And what happens is the world is seeing this, and because it's not physically violent, they're confusing the lack of physical violence with wickedness and another form of violence. All right. Economic sanctions is a form of violence. All right. This is Joel 3 and 9, because ultimately they're going to back these nations into a corner to where they have to fight. All right. This is Joel 3 and 9. "Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong." All right. And that's exactly what they're doing by them basically saying we're not going to submit to America. They're making it known that they're not willing to just accept being bullied anymore. And at a certain point in time, they were willing to deal with it. They were willing to be dominated by other nations, by Babylon the Great. But now you have other nations starting to wake up and say, nah, even if that means we got to fight and lose potentially, it's better than just laying down. And when you listen to the leader of Iran, understandably so, that's his rhetoric. The Iranians go back to Elam. All right, when you think about the Persian Empire, those are a very proud nation of people. And I wouldn't even call them proud. I would say they have a certain level of self-respect for themselves, because they've been getting sanctioned for decades now. And they've still stood on it and still went against the grain, so to speak. Not as much as they're doing now, but they definitely did more than other nations like China. You think 20 years ago, China wouldn't have said shit. Excuse my French. And what this is setting is a precedent. It's setting a new attitude in the air concerning these other nations that are against America. All right, or who America is against. Because these nations have been heavily sanctioned for decades now. And you're starting to see a rise in this parable and these proverbs and these taunting proverbs. And they're basically saying in their heart that they're strong. And it's beautiful because, again, Esau has been able to control the narrative for so long that people forgot he was wicked. You know, and that's the reality that's happening on the planet, is that the Babylonians, all right, the so-called white men in America and their control and domination of the planet. Part of that domination is the narrative, and they've had control of the narrative so long, people have forgotten how wicked it started and the amount of wickedness it takes to maintain it. So much so that when the truth is presented, people demonize it. They look at countries like Iran as if they're the bad guy, as if they haven't been bullied for decades. The Iran nuclear deal was something America agreed to. And they did what? They broke that treaty. All right. And now the world is starting to wake up to the reality of what America is. It's an empire that has had dominion through violence, whether physical violence or the violence of the tongue or economic violence. And now you have nations that are beginning to rise up and say, we're not going to take this shit. Excuse my French. This is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. Salakia, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. And it reads, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers. All right. Now I want to get this Greek word for truce breakers. All right. And it's aspondos, and it says without a treaty or covenant, of things not mutually agreed upon, abstinences from hostilities, that cannot be persuaded to enter into a covenant, implacable. And it says unable to be placated, unappeasable. All right, so they'll make a deal, and then years or decades later, they'll just say, you know what, fuck that deal. We don't care. We don't care if we signed on the dotted line and gave our word. We changed our mind. All right, continuing, it says, literally without limitation, which usually accompany a treaty. By implication, truceless, implacable, truce breaker. Now look at this word. It said truceless, an agreement between enemies or opponents to stop fighting or arguing for a certain time. All right. So if you're truceless, it says, look at this. It says truceless, marked by unending hostilities, having no hope of a truce. So the other nations are looking at it like, man, we can't talk to these people. We can't do a deal with these people. They're truce breakers. Because when you look at 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, it's saying in the last days, perilous times shall come. And it's describing how most men shall operate. Now, this is a reflection of the ruler. All right, let's go here. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 10. And I want to jump down to verse 2. As the judge of the people is himself, so are his officers. And what manner of man the ruler of the city is, such are all they that dwell therein. So when you skip to 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, it's describing how most men have become a carbon copy of the so-called white man. Who is Esau Edom? All right, Esau would have the rulership at the end of the age before the one they ignorantly called Jesus would have rulership. All right. This is why when you go to 2nd Esdras, the 6th chapter and the 9th verse, it says, for Esau is the end of the world and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. That's going into the age. Jacob is synonymous with Israel. And who is the head of Israel's rulership? The Messiah. So Esau would be in rulership at the end before the Messiah came into power, physically came into power. But Esau's end would be marked with war, with famine, with pestilence, with his desire to control people through the mark of the beast. But right now, for the topic of this lesson, we're dealing with the war that is brewing. And it's because the writing is on the wall and the world is waking up to the fact. When I say the world, I'm talking about the other nations. They're slowly starting to wake up to the understanding that there is no real truce with the so-called white man. That he's a truceless individual, meaning he'll make a deal with you and then years later he'll go back on that deal. And sometimes it doesn't even take years. And the other nations are looking at it like, what's the point? And a perfect example of that is the presidency. Every 4 to 8 years, you have a new person in office, and they a lot of times renege on all of the deals the president before them made. That's a truce breaker. And as a nation of people, that's how you look. You look like truce breakers. So the other nations are coming to the realization that you can't really make a deal with Babylon the Great, which is America. You can't make a deal with the Americans. There's no guarantee the deal will stand. And they're going to continue to paint you as the bad guy to justify them coveting your field and trying to take it through violence. So you have no choice but to beat your plowshares and the swords. And this is why a lot of nations feel the same way Iran feels. They're just afraid to step out there. But this is why Russia is so important. Russia is going to be a guard unto these other nations because they've all been abused, and rightfully so. They have a reason to be upset. They've been exploited. And just because they use fancy words like tariffs, sanctions, it's really just extortion by another name. It's another form of violence. But the Russians are a guard unto these nations, which is why another reason why Iran feels so bold to speak up like this. All right, this is Ezekiel 38. And dealing with this chapter is going into Gog, the land of Magog. All right, and we know that that's going into the Russians, the Edomites that dwell in the land of Gog. All right, because Gog is really a Japhetic land. But the Japhites were pushed out. And now you have Edomites who call themselves Russians occupying that land. So this is who this message is directed towards. And what did the Lord say in verse 7? Be thou prepared and prepare for thyself and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. All right, now let's start up. Who are they going to be a guard unto? Verse 5, Persia, which is Iran. All right. Before it was called Iran, if you look it up on Wikipedia, it was called Persia. It says Ethiopia and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomar and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee, going into the Turks. All right, so you have these nations that are being guarded by Russia through these alliances, their own individual defense agreements, as well as the BRICS nations. But they're all starting to rise up with one consent, and that they're against Babylon the Great, which is America, and for good reason, man. All right, and this is beautiful. This is a part of the taunting proverb. All right, this is Habakkuk chapter 2, and I'm going to jump down to 6. It says, shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee? And thou shalt be for booties unto them, because thou hast spoiled many nations. All the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. And now you're starting to hear a cry from these nations. Going in Isaiah the 14th chapter, saying, hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. So they're looking at you like, yeah, this guy's doing too much. And he's been doing too much, but now they feel emboldened enough to say that. And understand that's all from the spirit of the Heavenly Father, first and foremost. All right, the Lord say he declared the end from the beginning. And what did the Lord declare? War. All right, this is Isaiah 46 and 10. It says, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand. I will do all my pleasure. Calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country. Yea, I have spoken it, I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it, I will also do it. And a part of that is World War III. All right, so Lord willing, this was edifying with that. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasher Allah, and a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word, and all truth and in sincerity. Shalom.